The November fog pressed against the windows of 221B Baker Street like a living thing, and I had just settled into my chair with the evening paper when Holmes, without lifting his eyes from his chemical apparatus, remarked that our visitor had arrived by hansom despite owning a carriage, had recently suffered a financial loss, and was carrying news of a crime that would perplex Scotland Yard. Before I could question this pronouncement, Mrs. Hudson's knock announced the arrival of a gentleman whose very appearance confirmed Holmes's observations. Mr. Reginald Ashcroft entered our sitting room with the bearing of a man accustomed to authority, yet his usually immaculate attire showed signs of haste, and his pale complexion spoke of recent shock. "Mr. Holmes," he began, his voice trembling despite obvious efforts at composure, "I come to you regarding an impossibility that occurred last evening at my establishment, the Lantern House in Belgravia." Holmes finally turned from his experiments, his keen grey eyes immediately cataloguing every detail of our visitor's appearance. "Please, sit," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite us. "You manage this establishment rather than own it, having recently sold your own property to settle debts. The mud on your boots suggests you walked the final distance to avoid the expense of keeping your cab waiting. Now, tell us of these vanished guests." Ashcroft started visibly at Holmes's accuracy. "You are quite correct, sir. The Lantern House is an exclusive dining establishment I manage for Lord Pemberton. Last evening, I hosted a private dinner party in our most secure room, the Crystal Chamber on the second floor. The guests were 5 of London's most distinguished citizens: Sir Edmund Blackwood, the railway magnate; Lady Margaret Thornfield; Dr. Cornelius Whitmore, the renowned physician; Miss Adelaide Fairfax, the opera singer; and Mr. James Harrington, the banker." He paused, drawing a shuddering breath. "The evening proceeded normally until approximately 9 o'clock, when I personally served the final course. The guests were engaged in animated conversation about recent political developments. I locked the chamber door from the outside, as is our custom for private parties, and retired to my office to prepare the final accounting. When I returned at 10:30 to present the bill, I found the door still locked, but the room was empty." Holmes leaned forward, his fingertips pressed together. "Empty, you say? Define this precisely." Ashcroft's hands trembled as he continued. "Not merely vacant, Mr. Holmes, but as if the guests had simply dissolved into the air itself. Their chairs remained pushed back from the table, wine glasses half full, napkins scattered where they had been dropped. Lady Thornfield's pearl earring lay upon her plate, and Sir Edmund's gold watch still ticked beside his coffee cup, yet of the 5 guests themselves there was no trace whatsoever." "Most intriguing," Holmes murmured. "The chamber has but one entrance?" "Indeed, sir. The Crystal Chamber is our most exclusive room precisely because of its security. One door, which I personally locked and unlocked. The windows are sealed and painted shut, 40 feet above the street. The walls are solid stone, and the floor shows no signs of disturbance. Inspector Lestrade examined the room this morning and declared the matter beyond his comprehension." Holmes rose and began his characteristic pacing. "Mr. Ashcroft, you mentioned the guests were discussing political developments. Were there any tensions, any disagreements among the party?" Our visitor considered this carefully. "There was some heated debate regarding the proposed railway expansion, with Sir Edmund and Mr. Harrington taking opposing positions. But surely business disagreements could not account for 5 people vanishing from a locked room." "In my experience," Holmes replied, his eyes gleaming with intellectual challenge, "the impossible merely indicates we have not yet discovered the proper method. Watson, your coat. Mr. Ashcroft, we shall examine this crystal chamber immediately. The game, as they say, is afoot." The hansom cab clattered through the fog-laden streets of Belgravia, its wheels finding purchase on the slick cobblestones, as Holmes sat in contemplative silence beside me. The November mist seemed to thicken with each passing block. transforming the familiar thoroughfares into something altogether more mysterious. As we turned onto Eaton Square, Holmes suddenly leaned forward, his keen eyes fixed upon a figure emerging from a side street. "Watson," he murmured. "Observe the gentleman adjusting his cufflinks near the lamppost. Note the fresh ink stain on his right index finger and the slight tremor in his left hand. A forger, recently at work and nervous about tomorrow's transaction." Before I could respond, our destination came into view. The Lantern House stood before us, like a bastion of Victorian respectability, its Georgian facade gleaming despite the murky evening. Gas lamps flanked the entrance, casting wavering shadows that danced across the polished brass nameplate. Even in the dim light, I could discern the establishment's reputation for exclusivity in every carefully maintained detail. Ashcroft hurried us through the main entrance, past staff members whose hushed conversations and worried glances spoke volumes about the unprecedented nature of recent events. "The crystal chamber occupies the northeast corner of the second floor," Ashcroft explained, as we ascended the mahogany staircase, his voice echoing in the carpeted corridor. "Lord Pemberton spared no expense in its construction, ensuring complete privacy for his most distinguished guests. The interior spoke of understated luxury, with Persian rugs muffling our footsteps and oil paintings in heavy gilt frames adorning the walls. At the landing, a constable nodded respectfully as Ashcroft produced an ornate brass key. The moment we entered the crystal chamber, I understood why Scotland Yard had declared the matter beyond comprehension. The room remained exactly as described, frozen in time like some elaborate stage setting abandoned mid-performance. 5 chairs stood pushed back from an elegant dining table, their absent occupants having vanished as completely as smoke in the wind. The crystal chandelier that gave the chamber its name cast prismatic light across the abandoned place settings, each telling its own silent story of interrupted conversation. Holmes moved through the scene with surgical precision, his trained eye cataloguing every detail while his hands remained clasped behind his back. He approached the sealed windows first, running his fingers along the painted frames and testing their immobility with gentle pressure. 40 years of paint and neglect, he observed, before turning his attention to the walls themselves. He tapped methodically along the stone surfaces, listening intently to each resonant note. "Most interesting," he murmured, kneeling beside the ornamental screen in the northwestern corner. His magnifying glass revealed a clean arc in the accumulated dust at its base, suggesting frequent movement. From the carpet nearby, he retrieved a transparent fragment no larger than a fingernail. "Mica," he announced, holding it to the light. "Fresh and recently disturbed." Holmes next examined the brass lock with particular interest, producing his small toolkit and studying the mechanism closely. "Note, Watson, the faint traces of oil within the keyhole applied from the interior." He tested the key itself, weighing it thoughtfully before returning his attention to the room's ventilation. Striking a match, he watched the small flame bow distinctly toward the corner where the screen stood. "The draught tells us much," he said, approaching the dining table where Lady Thornfield's pearl earring lay beside her abandoned plate. The jewelry showed a small nick near the clasp, green with verdigris. "This has scraped against brass recently." He lifted Sir Edmund's pocket watch, noting its steady tick, then examined the wine glasses with scientific thoroughness. 2 sweetened with anisette, the others not. Most particular preferences for a social gathering. As we prepared to leave the chamber, Holmes paused at the threshold, his gaze sweeping the room with calculated intensity. "Mr. Ashcroft, I shall require detailed plans of this building's construction, particularly any recent renovations. Additionally, I need complete records of everyone present yesterday evening, including all staff members and any tradesmen who might have had access." His voice carried the quiet authority that I had learned to associate with the beginning of his most brilliant deductions. The architectural plans that Ashcroft produced in his cramped office revealed far more than mere building specifications. Holmes spread the vellum documents across the mahogany desk, his keen eyes immediately detecting inconsistencies that spoke of recent and deliberate modifications. Most illuminating, Watson, he murmured, tracing his finger along the crystal chamber's northern wall. Observe how Lord Pemberton's renovations 18 months ago created this curious void space behind the ornamental screen. The original Georgian structure shows no such feature. The guest records painted an equally intriguing picture of the vanished dinner party's true purpose. Sir Edmund Blackwood had specifically requested the private gathering to discuss his controversial railway expansion proposal, assembling a carefully chosen group whose combined influence could either advance or destroy his ambitious plans. Lady Margaret Thornfield controlled vast properties along the proposed route, while Dr. Cornelius Whitmore's medical practice served the affected neighborhoods. Miss Adelaide Fairfax's theatrical celebrity could sway public opinion, and James Harrington's banking connections held the financial keys to the entire venture. The stakes were considerably higher than a simple dinner conversation, Holmes observed, setting aside the documents. Mr. Ashcroft, summon your staff members who were present yesterday evening, beginning with whoever served the final course. Within minutes, a nervous young woman in starched uniform appeared at the office door. Mary Kellerman had worked at the Lantern House for 3 years, and her testimony proved immediately valuable. I assisted with the dessert service at 9 o'clock precisely, she began, her voice trembling slightly. The guests seemed quite agitated. Sir Edmund was gesticulating forcefully about necessary progress, while Mr. Harrington appeared most displeased. But what struck me as odd was Lady Thornfield's behavior. She kept glancing toward the corner screen, as if something there disturbed her. Concentration. The screen itself seemed positioned differently than usual, moved several inches forward from the wall. Holmes leaned forward with renewed interest. You're certain about the screen's position? Mary nodded emphatically. Absolutely, sir. I remember thinking I should adjust it after the guests departed, but of course they never. Her voice trailed away as the impossibility reasserted itself. The next witness, Thomas Whitfield, had maintained the establishment's gas fixtures and heating systems for over a decade. His weathered face spoke of years in service, and his testimony proved equally revealing. I was adjusting the corridor lamps when I heard raised voices from the crystal chamber, he admitted reluctantly. Sir Edmund was saying something about alternative arrangements, while another gentleman spoke harshly about destroying neighborhood character. Someone mentioned that the matter would be resolved tonight, one way or another. Holmes exchanged a meaningful glance with me before continuing. Mr. Whitfield, have you observed any recent modifications to the crystal chamber? The man shifted uncomfortably. Well, sir, there was that business with Lord Pemberton's contractors last month. They worked behind the screen for nearly a week, installing what his lordship called ventilation improvements. Most particular about keeping their work covered during business hours, they were. As Holmes dismissed the staff members, he returned his attention to the mechanical drawings, revealing a complex network of air ducts and gas lines with several modifications that seemed inconsistent with standard practice. Watson, he said quietly, producing his magnifying glass to examine a particular section. These renovations were far more extensive than Ashcroft realized. Note this discrepancy in wall thickness behind the screen, and here a notation for a disused fireplace flue, supposedly bricked up during the 1878 renovation. He cross-referenced the staff records with the building plans, his finger stopping at one particular name. Most intriguing. The head steward, Mr. Bartholomew, has served here for 40 years, since before the last major renovation. His quarters lie directly below the crystal chamber. He would possess intimate knowledge of the building's every secret. Holmes paused, tapping his chin thoughtfully. The mica fragment I discovered. Watson, it's commonly used in older gas lighting fixtures or as insulation. Its presence near that screen, combined with the fresh draft, suggests a mechanism recently operated. The fog continued thickening outside the office windows as Holmes folded the plans with decisive precision. I believe We are dealing with something far more elaborate than a simple disappearance. These guests did not vanish through supernatural means, they were systematically removed through methods both ingenious and methodical. Our next step is clear. We must speak with Mr. Bartholomew immediately. Mr. Bartholomew's quarters occupied the basement level directly beneath the crystal chamber, a modest apartment that reflected 4 decades of faithful service through its meticulous organization and understated dignity. The elderly steward received us with practiced deference, yet his pale complexion and the nervous habit of adjusting his cufflinks betrayed an anxiety that no amount of professional composure could entirely mask. The air carried the comforting scents of pipe tobacco and lavender, while polished brass fixtures gleamed despite the chamber's modest proportions. Holmes wasted no time in examining the ceiling, where a hairline crack ran in perfect alignment with the ornamental screen above. Striking a match, he held the flame near the junction of wall and floor, watching it bend distinctly toward the brickwork. "A draught, Mr. Bartholomew," he observed conversationally. "Most unusual for an interior room." The steward's lips thinned as he replied, "These old houses breathe in unexpected ways, sir." Moving to the narrow mantel, Holmes discovered a scatter of pale dust no thicker than breath. He touched it with his fingertip, then rubbed it thoughtfully between thumb and forefinger. "Mica, Watson, the very same substance we found upstairs." His penetrating gaze shifted to Bartholomew's hands, noting the shallow cut on the right thumb sealed with collodion and the grey-white residue beneath his nails that suggested recent contact with mortar or plaster. "The renovations 18 months ago," Holmes continued, "were rather more extensive than Lord Pemberton indicated. Were they not?" Bartholomew's composure showed its first fissure as he gestured toward the fireplace. His lordship insisted on absolute secrecy regarding the ventilation improvements. The contractors worked exclusively during closed hours, installing what appeared to be an elaborate air circulation system connected to the old fireplace flue. Holmes approached the brick surface, running his hands along the mortar with scientific precision. The lower courses showed telltale signs of recent work, 2 clean lines and the smooth thumb sweep of a practiced mason. Drawing his handkerchief across the bricks, he showed me the fresh soot that came away black. "This flue was opened and sealed again within the fortnight," he concluded. From somewhere within the walls came a faint, periodic creaking, not the mechanical regularity of clockwork, but the subtle stress sounds of timber settling after recent movement. Holmes crouched and teased from a floor crack a curled thread of unusually dark fiber. "Marine rope, tarred," he announced after examining it closely. "Uncommon in household fittings, yet essential for bearing considerable weight." "Mr. Bartholomew," Holmes said quietly, "you mentioned the contractors were a rough lot from the East End. Might one of them have been a man of heavy build, accustomed to manual labor?" The steward hesitated before nodding. "Indeed, sir. The foreman, a Mr. Caleb Briggs, was particularly robust. He seemed to understand the mechanical aspects better than his colleagues, and Lord Pemberton spoke with him privately on several occasions." As we prepared to leave the basement quarters, Bartholomew's voice trembled slightly. "Mr. Holmes, I fear there are aspects of this business that trouble me deeply. The guests last evening were discussing Sir Edmund's railway expansion with considerable heat. There was mention of a rival industrialist, Mr. Alistair Finch, who has sworn to see Blackwood ruined. Finch dined here only last week, uttering threats that made even the staff uncomfortable." Holmes paused at the threshold, his keen eyes sweeping the modest chamber one final time. "Most illuminating, Mr. Bartholomew. Your observations have been invaluable." Yet I detected in his manner a subtle reservation, as if the steward's revelations, while useful, represented only a fraction of a far more complex truth. As we ascended the narrow servants' staircase, Holmes murmured, "The mechanism grows clearer, Watson, though its purpose remains shrouded. We are dealing with something far more sophisticated than a simple kidnapping motivated by business rivalry. The engineering required for such an elaborate disappearance suggests planning that extends well beyond Mr. Finch's capabilities, however desperate his circumstances. The fog had thickened during our basement interview, transforming the Lantern House's elegant corridors into something altogether more sinister. Holmes's expression carried that familiar intensity that marked the approach of a crucial breakthrough. Yet I sensed we had only begun to unravel the true complexity of the vanished guest's fate. The fog had thickened into an almost tangible presence by the time we encountered Inspector Lestrade in the corridor outside Ashcroft's office, his compact frame radiating the determined energy of a man convinced he had solved an impossible puzzle. "Ah, Holmes," he declared with characteristic confidence, removing his bowler hat with a flourish. "I've just returned from questioning the staff. This Caleb Briggs fellow, the foreman from the renovations, has been seen haunting the gin shops of Limehouse, and that Finch character has been making public threats against Blackwood. Hired muscle and a secret passage, that's your miracle explained." Holmes inclined his head with polite interest, though I detected the familiar glint in his eyes that suggested Lestrade's conclusions, while logical, represented merely the surface of a far deeper mystery. "Then let us discover this secret passage properly," he replied, leading us back into the crystal chamber with purposeful strides. The abandoned dinner setting remained exactly as we had left it, frozen in time like some elaborate theatrical tableau awaiting its final act. Moving directly to the ornamental screen, Holmes produced a taper and struck a match, holding the flame near the junction where screen met wall. The smoke streamed toward the carved woodwork and vanished entirely, confirming the draft he had detected earlier. With delicate precision, he ran his fingers along the intricate foliage pattern until he found what he sought, a minute depression cleverly concealed within the decorative motifs. The mechanism responded to his touch with surprising smoothness, the entire screen pivoting inward on hidden hinges to reveal a narrow passage beyond. A chill breath of stale air emerged from the opening, carrying with it the distinctive odors of coal tar and something more delicate, star anise, perhaps, or another aromatic compound. Lestrade stepped forward eagerly, his lantern illuminating an iron gallery that extended into darkness, its brass fittings gleaming dully in the wavering light. "Most ingenious," Holmes murmured, kneeling to examine the threshold, where a polished brass runner showed the telltale signs of recent use. "Note how the mechanism operates in perfect silence, Watson." A man could vanish from his dinner companions while they remained entirely unaware of the wall's movement. He produced his magnifying glass, studying a crescent-shaped mark, rubbed bright in the verdigris coating of the brass, fitting a mark that corresponded precisely to the damaged clasp on Lady Thornfield's abandoned pearl earring. Returning to the dining table, Holmes tested each wineglass with scientific precision, his keen senses detecting the subtle differences in their contents. "2, sweetened with anisette, 3 without," he announced. "Yet all carry an underlying bitterness that speaks of pharmaceutical intervention. The timing of the final course becomes crucial, 9 o'clock precisely, allowing sufficient time for the compound to take effect." Ashcroft appeared at the chamber door, his face pale with fresh anxiety. "Mr. Holmes, I've discovered something most disturbing in our reservation book. An anonymous party has booked the Crystal Chamber for next Thursday evening. They call themselves the Committee for Civic Prudence and paid their deposit in crisp new banknotes." His hands trembled slightly as he presented the leather-bound ledger. Holmes examined the entry with intense interest, noting the precise handwriting and the unusual formality of the language. "Our adversaries plan an encore performance," he observed quietly. "Confidence breeds carelessness, and repetition often reveals the patterns that single events conceal." He closed the hidden door with a gentle push, watching it seal seamlessly back into the wall's surface. Lestrade had already begun organizing his search of the building's hidden passages, his practical mind focused on the immediate task of apprehending Caleb Briggs. Holmes, however, drew me aside as we prepared to leave the chamber. "Watson," he said in low tones that carried an unusual urgency, "we are dealing with something far more sophisticated than a simple kidnapping motivated by business rivalry. The engineering precision, The pharmaceutical knowledge, the theatrical staging these elements suggest a mind of considerable education and resources. The fog continued its relentless embrace of London's streets as we descended to the main floor, transforming the familiar city into an alien landscape of whispered sounds and shifting shadows. Holmes walked with the measured pace of a man whose theories were crystallizing into certainty, though he kept his conclusions to himself with characteristic discretion. The hansom cab delivered us through the fog-shrouded streets to Baker Street, where Holmes immediately disappeared into his chemical laboratory with the wine samples we had procured from the crystal chamber. The familiar sounds of bubbling retorts and the acrid scent of reagents soon filled our sitting room, while I settled by the fire to contemplate the day's bewildering discoveries. Within the hour, Holmes emerged with the satisfied expression of a man whose suspicions had been confirmed. "Watson," he announced, wiping his hands methodically, "the residue from those sweetened glasses reveals a most sophisticated compound chloral hydrate, combined with a plant-based paralytic that renders the victim unconscious within minutes, while leaving no lasting trace. This is not the crude work of common criminals, but the precise application of pharmaceutical knowledge." He moved to his desk, spreading the architectural plans we had obtained from Ashcroft. The mica fragment proves equally illuminating, its insulation material from a gas fixture, suggesting temporary ventilation modifications to clear any lingering chemical vapors from the chamber. Before I could respond, a sharp rap at our door announced the arrival of a constable bearing urgent news from Inspector Lestrade. "The hidden passage," he reported, extended beyond the iron gallery to a service stair concealed behind the servant's closet, ultimately connecting to a postern gate that opened onto Grosvenor Mews. Most significantly, a stable boy had witnessed two closed broughams waiting there the previous evening, their doors painted over and lamps hooded for concealment. Holmes received this intelligence with keen interest, but I detected in his manner the restless energy that marked the approach of direct action. "The chemical evidence and mechanical ingenuity point to something far more elaborate than Lestrade's theory suggests," he declared, reaching for his coat. "Our mysterious Mr. Briggs requires immediate examination, and I suspect we shall find him in circumstances rather different from those the inspector expects." The fog had thickened as we made our way toward Whitechapel, transforming London's familiar thoroughfares into an alien landscape of shifting shadows and muffled sounds. Holmes directed our driver through the maze of narrow streets until we reached the vicinity of the public houses where Briggs was known to frequent. We had not waited long in the concealment of a doorway when our quarry emerged from the Crown and Anchor, his powerful frame unmistakable even in the dim gaslight. Yet the man we observed bore little resemblance to the crude laborer described in the official reports. His clothing, while rough, showed careful maintenance, and his bearing suggested someone accustomed to command rather than mere manual labor. Most tellingly, when a well-dressed gentleman approached him in the shadows, the exchange that followed spoke of business conducted at a considerably higher level than common criminality. Following Briggs through the labyrinthine passages of the East End proved a considerable challenge, as the man demonstrated an intimate knowledge of London's hidden arteries that spoke of years spent navigating its secret ways. His destination proved to be a narrow warehouse near the Thames, its grimy exterior concealing activities that would have surprised Inspector Lestrade considerably. Holmes's lock-picking skills gained us entry within moments, revealing an interior that defied all expectations. Workbenches lined the walls, equipped with precision instruments more suited to a university laboratory than a riverside warehouse. Chemical apparatus gleamed in the dim light, while the air carried the distinctive odors of ether and various pharmaceutical compounds. Most remarkable were the architectural drawings spread across a central table, detailed plans showing not only the Lantern House but several other prominent London establishments, each marked with careful notations indicating structural modifications and mechanical installations. "Our adversary has been exceedingly thorough," Holmes murmured, studying the plans with intense concentration. "These represent months of preparation, possibly years of careful planning." The sound, of approaching footsteps sent us scrambling for concealment behind the chemical apparatus, where we became unwilling witnesses to a conversation that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Briggs entered, accompanied by two companions, whose educated speech contrasted sharply with their rough appearance. The Thursday performance must proceed flawlessly, the first declared with obvious authority. Lord, Pemberton's associates have grown suspicious, and we cannot afford another delay. His companion consulted a pocket watch anxiously. The committee grows impatient. They've invested considerable resources in this venture, and they expect results that justify their confidence. As the conspirators departed, Holmes emerged from concealment with the expression of a man whose theories had been dramatically confirmed. Watson, he said quietly, we are witnessing something far more ambitious than a simple kidnapping scheme. These men operate as part of a larger organization with resources and connections that extend well beyond the criminal classes. Back at Baker Street, Holmes paced our sitting room with the restless energy of a mind grappling with complex deductions. The vanished guests were not random targets, Watson, but carefully selected representatives of London's most influential circles. Consider their positions: Blackwood with his railway expansion, Lady Thornfield controlling vast properties, Harrington with his banking connections. Each possessed the power to shape public policy or economic development. He paused before the fireplace, his keen eyes reflecting the dancing flames. The Committee for Civic Prudence represents something far more sophisticated than mere criminal enterprise. We are dealing with ideological extremists who believe these individuals represent obstacles to their vision of social reform. The theatrical nature of their methods, the impossible disappearance, the anonymous booking for a repeat performance suggests a desire not merely to eliminate opposition, but to demonstrate their capabilities to a wider audience. The fog continued its relentless embrace of London streets as Holmes formulated his response to this unprecedented challenge. Thursday's performance will proceed, Watson, but this time we shall be present to witness the final act. Our adversaries, in their arrogance, have provided us with an invaluable opportunity to turn their own methods against them. The game has become considerably more complex, but the principles of detection remain unchanged: observe, deduce, and act with precision when the moment arrives. The morning brought news that transformed our understanding of the conspiracy's ruthless efficiency. Inspector Lestrade's telegram arrived with our breakfast, its terse message reporting that Caleb Briggs had been discovered dead in his lodgings from apparent heart failure, though the convenient timing struck me as remarkably suspicious. Holmes read the dispatch with growing intensity, his breakfast cooling forgotten as the implications crystallized with chilling clarity. They are eliminating loose ends, Watson, he declared, rising from the table with characteristic abruptness. Briggs possessed intimate knowledge of their methods, and dead men provide no inconvenient testimony to Scotland Yard investigators. Gazing out at the fog-shrouded street with the calculating expression I had learned to associate with his most dangerous moods. Yet his death reveals more than his testimony might have accomplished. Desperation breeds carelessness, and our opponents have just demonstrated their willingness to commit murder to protect their elaborate charade. The next 48 hours witnessed preparations that possessed a precision excluding all but the most necessary communication. Holmes dispatched a series of carefully worded telegrams, then disappeared into his chemical laboratory with samples and apparatus whose purpose remained tantalizingly obscure. When he emerged, it was with a small sealed vial that he slipped into his waistcoat pocket and an expression of grim satisfaction that suggested his theoretical preparations had yielded practical results. Watson, he announced Wednesday evening, producing from his wardrobe items I had never seen before. The committee's arrogance provides us with an invaluable opportunity. They believe their methods are foolproof, their theatrical staging impeccable. But every performance leaves traces, and repetition inevitably reveals the patterns that single events conceal. He held up a carefully tailored suit of conservative cut, a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles, and a meticulously crafted grey wig. Tomorrow evening, I shall be Mr. Elias Thorne, a retired government official whose outspoken opposition to various progressive movements makes him precisely the sort of undesirable influence our committee believes requires removal. The transformation he underwent was nothing short of remarkable. The sharp angles of his hawk-like features softened behind the spectacles, while the grey wig and subtle padding altered his entire bearing from that of a predatory intellect to a man burdened by years and rigid convictions. He practiced the persona with unsettling thoroughness, adopting the measured speech patterns and conservative mannerisms of his assumed identity until even I found myself addressing a stranger. His strategic arrangements extended far beyond personal disguise. He returned to the Lantern House under pretext of clarifying reservation details, where he entrusted Mary Kellerman with a sealed bottle of anisette and explicit instructions that it alone was to be used for the evening service. "You will not be persuaded otherwise by rank or argument," he told her with gravity that left no room for disobedience. The girl, who had already demonstrated quiet courage, nodded with determined understanding. In the crystal chamber itself, Holmes examined the hidden mechanism with scientific precision, installing detection devices of ingenious simplicity. A silk thread stretched across the brass runner, secured with microscopic dabs of gum, would snap the moment the wall began its silent movement. Fine lampblack dusted along the inner edge would transfer to any hand that operated the mechanism, while a tiny bell contrived from clockwork components and positioned beneath the dining table would signal the slightest vibration in the floor. His arrangements extended to the mews behind the establishment, where he measured the throwing arc of the postern gate's hinges and positioned Lestrade's men with mathematical precision. 2 constables would occupy the alley beyond the gate to intercept departing carriages, while another would shadow the passage from the iron gallery, and a 4th would maintain surveillance near the front entrance, disguised as a porter awaiting his employer. "Your role, Watson, will be equally crucial," he explained, as Thursday's fog began its inevitable descent upon London. "You will position yourself in Grosvenor Mews, disguised as a hansom driver awaiting a late fare. Your cab must be stationed directly opposite the postern gate, allowing observation of any vehicles that approach or depart. Under no circumstances are you to intervene until I provide the agreed signal 3 sharp whistles in succession." As evening approached, Holmes's final preparations took on an almost ritualistic quality. He tested the small vial from his chemical experiments, ensuring its contents remained potent, then concealed it within his waistcoat where it could be accessed instantly if required. His disguise as Mr. Elias Thorne was perfected down to the smallest detail, from the conservative cut of his clothing to the slightly pompous manner of speech that characterized his assumed persona. "Remember, Watson," he said as we prepared to depart for our respective positions, "we are confronting something far more sophisticated than common criminality. These individuals possess the resources and connections to eliminate influential figures with apparent supernatural efficiency, leaving no evidence beyond empty rooms and baffled investigators. Tonight's performance is not merely a repeat demonstration, but potentially part of a coordinated campaign targeting multiple locations simultaneously." The fog had thickened to an almost tangible presence by the time I took my position in the mews, transforming the familiar streets into an alien landscape of shifting shadows and muffled sounds. From my vantage point atop the hansom, I could observe both the postern gate and the approach routes that any vehicles would necessarily use. The weight of responsibility pressed upon me. Yet beneath it surged a familiar current of admiration for Holmes's audacious brilliance in placing himself deliberately within the heart of such elaborate danger. As the appointed hour approached, I watched my friend disappear into the fog-shrouded entrance of the Lantern House. A figure utterly transformed, walking willingly into what might prove the most perilous performance of his remarkable career. The stage was set for the Committee for Civic Prudence, and their unwitting star was Sherlock Holmes himself. The fog had thickened to an almost impenetrable wall. By the time 4 additional guests arrived at the Lantern House, their carriages materializing from the grey mist, like phantoms summoned for some supernatural gathering. From my elevated position atop the hansom, I observed each arrival with growing unease: a portly magistrate whose measured gait spoke of years dispensing justice, a sharp-featured woman in expensive mourning attire, an elderly clergyman leaning heavily upon his walking stick, and a younger man whose nervous energy marked him as either a journalist or minor government official. The Committee for Civic Prudence had assembled their targets with characteristic precision, selecting individuals whose combined influence could reshape London's social and political landscape. Holmes, transformed utterly into the conservative Mr. Elias Thorne, entered the establishment with such convincing dignity that even I found myself momentarily doubting his identity. His performance was masterful: the slightly pompous bearing, the measured speech patterns, the rigid moral certainty that would make him precisely the sort of corrupting influence these radicals sought to eliminate. Two closed broughams had positioned themselves near the postern gate with practiced stealth, their approach so silent through the fog that I detected them only when their muffled lamps became visible through the swirling grey. The church bells of St. George's struck 9 o'clock, their bronze voices hanging in the thick air like physical warnings. Almost immediately, a small figure detached itself from the shadows near the gate. Mary Kellerman, her cap pulled low, moving with the quick, nervous energy of someone carrying momentous news. She approached the nearest constable and spoke in urgent whispers that carried to my ears through the fog's strange acoustics. "It's begun," she said, her breath smoking in the chill air. The silk thread snapped, and the little bell trembled just as Mr. Holmes predicted. Within moments, the postern gate stirred open, admitting figures whose movements spoke of rehearsed efficiency. They emerged bearing what appeared to be crates wrapped in dark canvas, but their careful handling revealed the true nature of their cargo: human forms, unconscious and helpless, transported with the precision of professional undertakers. The operation proceeded with mechanical smoothness. Each wrapped figure transferred from the hidden passage to the waiting broughams with practiced coordination that confirmed this performance had been executed multiple times before. Yet even as I witnessed this systematic removal, my trained eye caught glimpses of something more complex unfolding. One of the wrapped figures, smaller and more slightly built than the others, moved with subtle deliberation that suggested consciousness beneath the apparent helplessness. Holmes, I realized with a mixture of admiration and terror, was maintaining his disguise even while being transported, allowing himself to be carried into the very heart of the conspiracy while remaining alert and aware. The loading continued with methodical precision, 4 figures disappearing into the broughams while their identities remained concealed beneath dark wrappings. As the vehicles prepared to depart, a voice drifted from the passage, educated, authoritative, and chillingly familiar from our warehouse reconnaissance. "Excellent efficiency," it declared with cold satisfaction. "Lord Pemberton will be pleased with tonight's results. The committee's demonstration should convince even the most skeptical observers of our capabilities." Lord Pemberton. The name struck me like a physical blow, for it revealed the conspiracy's true scope: not merely a radical organization operating from London's shadows, but one with connections reaching into the very establishment that owned and controlled the Lantern House itself. Holmes had walked deliberately into a trap far more sophisticated than we had imagined, yet his strategic positioning suggested he remained in control of circumstances that appeared to have overwhelmed him completely. The fog continued its relentless embrace as the broughams began their departure, carrying their unconscious cargo toward destinations unknown. Still, no whistle came, and I realized that Holmes's plan required patience beyond my natural instincts. Trusting to his chemical preparations and tactical genius, while every fiber of my being screamed for immediate action. The 3 sharp whistles cut through the fog like silver blades, their piercing clarity transforming the muse from a place of tense waiting into a theater of coordinated action. I leaped from the hansom with practiced speed, my heart pounding as constables emerged from every shadow with the disciplined precision of a military operation. The 2 broughams, which had barely traveled 100 yards through the swirling mist, found their escape routes suddenly and definitively blocked by strategically positioned vehicles and uniformed men who materialized from the fog like specters of justice. Lestrade's voice rang out with triumphant authority as he approached the first brougham, his lantern casting wavering light across the scene. "In the King's name, you are under arrest." The inspector threw open the carriage door with characteristic vigor, revealing two figures slumped in apparent unconsciousness within the leather-appointed interior. Yet, as his light fell upon the third occupant, wrapped in dark canvas like the others, that figure stirred, with surprising vitality, and began methodically unwrapping himself. The grey wig fell away first, followed by the wire-rimmed spectacles, revealing the sharp aquiline features that I knew as well as my own reflection. Holmes sat up with fluid grace, his keen eyes gleaming with intellectual satisfaction as he surveyed the controlled chaos surrounding the arrested vehicles. In his hand, I glimpsed the small sealed vial from his chemical preparations, now empty of its contents. "Good evening, Inspector," Holmes said with remarkable composure, as if emerging from an afternoon nap rather than the heart of a criminal conspiracy. "Your timing, as always, is impeccable." Lestrade's expression shifted from triumph to bewilderment as he recognized the figure before him. "Holmes? But how?" "We saw you carried out unconscious with the others." Holmes smiled with quiet satisfaction as he stepped from the brougham, brushing dust from his conservative attire. "Precisely the intention, my dear Lestrade. The chloral hydrate compound they employed, while potent enough to render their other victims helpless, proved insufficient against a small preventive dose of atropine sulfate. I remained perfectly conscious throughout the entire operation, observing their methods and gathering the evidence necessary for their complete exposure. The second brum yielded even more valuable prizes, as constables extracted 3 struggling figures whose educated protests could not disguise their obvious guilt. The first was a man of heavy build whose hands bore the telltale stains of the lampblack we had discovered clearly the mysterious Mr. Briggs's replacement in operating the crystal chamber's hidden mechanisms. The second proved to be Mr. Alistair Finch himself, his financial desperation having driven him into alliance with forces far more dangerous than simple business rivalry. Most significantly, the third figure was Lord Pemberton, his usually immaculate appearance now disheveled by the evening's unexpected developments. His attempts at indignant bluster could not conceal the calculating intelligence that had orchestrated the entire conspiracy from within the very establishment that housed it. "This is an outrageous violation of my rights," he declared. Yet his eyes darted nervously toward Holmes with the recognition of a chess player who has just discovered checkmate. "Lord Pemberton," Holmes replied with dangerous quietness, "your rights were forfeit the moment you transformed your establishment into a theater for systematic abduction and coercion. The Committee for Civic Prudence, I suspect, will find its membership considerably reduced after tonight's revelations." He turned his attention to the remaining occupants of both vehicles, his expression softening with genuine concern. "Watson, these other victims require immediate medical attention. The compound they received was considerably more potent than my own dose, designed to maintain unconsciousness for extended periods. I found the 4 genuine victims still deeply insensible, but breathing steadily, the portly magistrate, the sharp-featured woman in mourning attire, the elderly clergyman, and the nervous young official. Their pulses remained strong despite their pallor, suggesting complete recovery given proper medical care and time for the chemical compounds to clear their systems. As the constables efficiently secured their prisoners and arranged for the victims' transport to hospital, Holmes explained the evening's true strategy. The anisette I provided through Mary Kellerman contained a mild sedative that would affect anyone handling the bottles during preparation. Combined with my own immunity to their knockout compound, this allowed me to observe their entire operation while appearing helpless. The mechanical ingenuity of their methods, the pharmaceutical precision of their compounds, and most importantly, the identity of their true leadership. The fog began its gradual retreat as dawn approached, revealing the full scope of the night's triumph. Yet Holmes's expression carried the satisfaction of a man whose theoretical framework had been confirmed through practical application rather than mere luck. "The immediate conspiracy has been neutralized," he declared as we prepared our return to Baker Street. "But tonight's success represents merely the opening movement of what promises to be a much longer investigation into the committee's broader activities throughout London." The game, as Holmes would say, was far from afoot. It was decisively won. Yet the victory revealed depths of corruption and conspiracy that would require all his genius to fully unravel. The grey light of dawn filtered through the grimy windows of Scotland Yard as Lord Pemberton paced his cell like a caged predator, his usual aristocratic composure shattered by the night's revelations. Inspector Lestrade emerged from the interrogation room with the satisfied expression of a man whose patience had finally yielded results, yet his eyes carried the weight of discoveries that challenged everything he thought he understood about criminal investigation. He began, settling heavily into the chair beside us in his cramped office. "The interrogations have revealed something far more disturbing than a simple kidnapping conspiracy. Pemberton claims membership in what he calls the Progressive Alliance, a coalition of radical thinkers who believe traditional authority structures must be dismantled through any means necessary." He consulted his notes with obvious unease. "But more importantly, he's revealed the location where they've been holding the original 5 guests." Holmes leaned forward with renewed intensity, his keen eyes reflecting the gaslight as he processed this crucial intelligence. "The warehouse near Shadwell, I presume?" The aromatic masking scents we detected pointed toward the spice districts, and the tidal access would provide discreet transport. Lestrade nodded grimly. "A converted storage facility on Wapping Wall. Pemberton insists they're alive, held in what he describes as comfortable confinement, while being subjected to what he terms educational discussions about their social responsibilities." Within the hour, our small party had assembled at the Thames-side location, the morning mist rising from the dark water like the breath of some slumbering leviathan. The warehouse stood before us with deceptive innocence, its weathered brick facade giving no hint of the human drama contained within its walls. Holmes approached the building with characteristic precision, his trained senses immediately detecting the subtle signs that marked it as more than a simple storage facility. The lock yielded to his practiced touch within moments, admitting us to an interior that defied all expectations. The ground floor contained legitimate cargo crates stenciled with exotic ports and manifests that would satisfy any casual inspection. Yet Holmes's keen eye immediately identified the incongruities: fresh oil stains near a mechanical winch, the lingering sweetness of star anise in the air, and most tellingly, the sound of human breathing from the floor above. We ascended the narrow staircase with weapons drawn, though Holmes's confident manner suggested he expected no resistance. The upper level had been converted into what could only be described as a gentleman's prison. 5 comfortable beds, arranged in a well-ventilated chamber, each occupied by a figure whose peaceful breathing spoke of pharmaceutical intervention rather than natural sleep. Sir Edmund Blackwood lay with his strong features softened by unconsciousness, while Lady Margaret Thornfield's aristocratic bearing remained evident even in repose. Dr. Cornelius Whitmore's surgeon's hands bore ink stains, and beside him lay documents bearing his signature. Miss Adelaide Fairfax's throat, London's beloved voice, rose and fell tranquilly, while James Harrington's brow showed the dampness of recent exertion, a pen still clutched in his relaxed fingers. Holmes moved immediately to the service table, where a collection of documents revealed the conspiracy's true purpose. "They do not murder, Watson," he said with controlled fury, examining the papers with scientific precision. "They erase. Observe these renunciations, transfers, and public letters, each drafted in duplicate, each exacting capitulation to the committee's vision of social progress." The documents told a chilling story. Blackwood, renouncing his railway expansion, Lady Thornfield agreeing to sell properties at favourable terms, Whitmore endorsing spurious public health alarms, Miss Fairfax lending her celebrity to causes she would normally abhor, and Harrington withholding crucial financing from various enterprises. The miracle of disappearance serves as both lever and advertisement, Holmes continued, producing a small vial from his chemical kit. They vanish a person for days or weeks, extract signature and spirit through a combination of pharmaceutical coercion and psychological pressure, then return them dazed with convenient explanations for their absence. He administered the counterstimulant with practiced efficiency, beginning with Dr. Whitmore, whose medical knowledge would help him understand his situation most quickly. The awakening process proved both heartening and disturbing as each victim gradually returned to consciousness with fragmented memories of their ordeal. They recalled the dinner at the Lantern House, then an oppressive sweetness in the air, followed by darkness punctuated by glimpses of faces behind gauze masks and voices of cultivated authority urging cooperation with reasonable requests. At the mention of Pemberton's name, Lady Thornfield's lips compressed with obvious recognition, while Harrington's eyes steadied with the focused anger of a man who understood he had been systematically betrayed. The morning papers, delivered as we returned to Baker Street with our rescued victims, carried headlines that would have seemed fantastical mere days earlier. "Impossible disappearances explained," proclaimed the Times, while the Telegraph offered aristocratic conspiracy exposed by brilliant detection. Yet Holmes showed little satisfaction in the public recognition. His attention focused entirely on the broader implications revealed by our investigation. "Consider the elegance of their strategy, Watson," he said as we settled before our fireplace with the accumulated evidence spread across the Persian rug. By creating the impression of supernatural intervention, they avoided the practical difficulties of conventional assassination while achieving the same political objectives. Fear of the unknown proves far more effective than mere physical intimidation, while the theatrical staging ensures that even failure becomes advertisement for their capabilities. The documents recovered from Lord Pemberton's person revealed a conspiracy extending far beyond the Lantern House, showing a network of similar establishments throughout Britain where influential citizens had been systematically targeted. Each venue possessed the same mechanical ingenuity, hidden passages, chemical compounds, and theatrical staging designed to create the impression of otherworldly intervention. The pharmaceutical sophistication alone suggested university-trained chemists, while the mechanical engineering required professional expertise of the highest order. "We are not dealing with common criminals, Watson, but with educated revolutionaries who possess both the knowledge and resources to challenge the very foundations of civilized society," Holmes observed, his voice carrying the grim satisfaction of a man who had solved one puzzle only to discover it formed part of a vastly more complex design. "The Committee for Civic Prudence represents not merely a criminal conspiracy, but a coordinated revolutionary movement capable of destabilizing the entire social order." As Inspector Lestrade departed with his prisoners and evidence, eager to pursue the broader investigation that our discoveries had made possible, I found myself reflecting on the night's extraordinary events. Holmes, in his audacious gamble of allowing himself to be captured, had not only solved an impossible mystery, but had unearthed a conspiracy of chilling proportions. The vanished guests of the Lantern House had been rescued and their tormentors apprehended, yet the victory revealed depths of corruption and ideological extremism that would require all of Holmes's genius to fully unravel. "My dear Watson," Holmes said quietly, reaching for his violin as the morning light grew stronger beyond our windows, "we have broken a single link in a chain that extends throughout the kingdom. The game, as they say, continues." The haunting strains of Holmes's violin filled our sitting room as the morning light strengthened beyond the windows. Yet, even as he spoke of the continuing game, Mrs. Hudson's knock announced developments that would prove his prescience remarkably accurate. She admitted Mary Kellerman, whose pale but determined countenance carried news that transformed our understanding of the conspiracy's remaining reach. "Mr. Holmes," the young woman began, her voice steady despite obvious exhaustion. "Mr. Ashcroft begged me to deliver this before his departure. He seemed most agitated, speaking of corrections that must be made to his earlier testimony." The envelope contained documents that revealed Ashcroft's deeper complicity in the affair, a confession of debts that had made him vulnerable to Lord Pemberton's coercion, along with records of mysterious visitors who had met privately within the Lantern House after hours. Most significantly, the papers identified a Dr. Calder who had supplied both pharmaceutical compounds and detailed instructions for their application, arriving always by the service entrance and departing before dawn. Holmes examined the confession with characteristic intensity, his keen eyes immediately detecting details that elevated this intelligence beyond mere supplementary evidence. "Watson," he announced, producing his magnifying glass to study a particular letterhead. "Observe the watermark, an owl perched upon a crescent moon. This paper originates from a single source in London, and one whose location we can determine with mathematical precision." He moved to his chemical apparatus, treating a corner of the document with a solution that revealed additional text previously invisible. "Star anise oil, used to mask the scent of pharmaceutical preparations. Our Dr. Calder possesses knowledge that extends well beyond conventional medical practice." Within the hour, our investigation had led us through the fog-shrouded streets to Clerkenwell Close, where the printing establishment of Greaves and Pickering presented an facade of respectable commerce that concealed activities of considerably more sinister purpose. Holmes approached the building with predatory focus, his trained senses immediately detecting the subtle indicators that marked it as more than a legitimate business enterprise. The black stream of ink-laden water running toward the gutters, the distinctive chemical odors seeping from basement ventilation, and most tellingly, the fragments of mica glinting in the runoff, spoke of recent and specialized printing operations. The proprietor, a gaunt figure whose evangelical manner could not disguise his obvious guilt, proved remarkably forthcoming under Holmes's relentless questioning. The basement revealed a sophisticated operation, specialized presses, chemical compounds for treating paper, and most damning, a ledger whose entries documented the printing of materials for the Committee for Civic Prudence, along with lecture announcements for a Dr. Lucien Calder of St. Bartholomew's Hospital. The broken typeface that had marked the forged documents lay scattered in a type case, while the distinctive owl watermark paper filled an entire storage cabinet. Dr. Calder supplies both the intellectual framework and the practical methods, Holmes observed, examining a visiting card discovered beneath the printer's blotter. Public health lectures provide perfect cover for recruiting sympathizers, while his medical credentials lend authority to his revolutionary philosophy. The card itself bore an appointment notation that made my blood run cold, a meeting scheduled for that very evening at the Lantern House, apparently arranged before the previous night's dramatic exposure of the conspiracy. The afternoon brought a succession of developments that confirmed the scope of our adversary's remaining capabilities. Lady Thornfield, still recovering from her ordeal, received us with aristocratic composure that barely concealed her burning indignation. Her testimony revealed Dr. Calder's public lectures as sophisticated recruitment tools, presenting radical social theories under the guise of medical advancement while identifying potential targets among London's influential citizens. He spoke of social hygiene, with the same clinical detachment others might discuss surgical procedures, she recalled, with obvious distaste. Sir Edmund Blackwood's visit provided equally disturbing intelligence about the conspiracy's financial infrastructure. His banking connections had revealed a network of accounts established throughout Europe, suggesting coordination with similar organizations in Paris, Vienna, and Berlin. "They operate with the resources of a government and the secrecy of a criminal enterprise," he declared, his usual confidence shaken by the realization of how completely he had been manipulated. As evening approached, Holmes's preparations took on the methodical precision that marked his most dangerous undertakings. Dr. Calder believes his theatrical methods remain undetected, his revolutionary network intact, he announced, checking his pocket watch with calculated timing. Tonight, we shall provide him with a final performance that will conclude this elaborate charade permanently. The stage is set, Watson, for the true architect of these impossible disappearances to reveal himself at last. The evening fog had begun its retreat from London's streets when Dr. Lucien Calder arrived at the Lantern House with the punctuality of a man accustomed to precise scheduling. His distinguished bearing and silver-touched beard lent him the gravitas of academic authority. Yet Holmes, positioned strategically within the crystal chamber itself, detected immediately the calculating intelligence that marked him as far more dangerous than any common criminal. The doctor carried his medical bag with practiced ease, his keen eyes surveying the chamber where so much recent drama had unfolded with obvious proprietorial interest. "Mr. Holmes," Calder said without preamble, his cultured voice carrying the faint trace of a continental accent, "your reputation for theatrical revelation precedes you. I confess myself curious to observe your methods firsthand." He moved to the dining table, where evidence of Thursday evening's performance remained carefully preserved, his surgeon's hands examining the abandoned wine glasses with scientific detachment. Chloral hydrate combined with plant-based paralytic crude but effective for temporary incapacitation without permanent harm. Holmes stepped from the shadows near the ornamental screen, his keen eyes fixed upon their visitor with predatory intensity. "Dr. Calder, your associates proved remarkably accommodating in revealing the scope of your revolutionary network. The mica fragment discovered near this screen indicated recent activity in the disused fireplace flue. The tarred marine rope fibers suggested a sophisticated counterweight mechanism. Most tellingly, the specific pharmaceutical compounds required not merely criminal knowledge, but the precise expertise of a trained physician with access to hospital supplies. The doctor smiled with genuine appreciation for Holmes's deductive abilities, yet his manner carried the dangerous calm of a fanatic convinced of his own righteousness. "You understand only the surface manifestations of a much deeper philosophy, Mr. Holmes. The Progressive Alliance represents the inevitable evolution of human society, the systematic replacement of inherited privilege with scientific rationality. Those we disappeared were not victims but obstacles to necessary social advancement." From his medical bag, Dr. Calder produced a small atomizer, whose brass fittings gleamed in the gaslight. "Star anise masks the bitter scent most effectively," he explained, with clinical detachment, "while rapid absorption through the respiratory system ensures unconsciousness within seconds. Most convenient for maintaining the illusion of supernatural intervention." Yet even as he raised the device, Holmes's hand moved to his waistcoat pocket with practiced speed, withdrawing a small vial whose contents he dashed against the marble floor. "Potassium permanganate solution," Holmes explained calmly as neutralizing vapor filled the air. "Your pharmaceutical expertise, while considerable, overlooks certain basic principles of chemical interaction." The sound of approaching footsteps announced Inspector Lestrade's arrival with his constables, their timing coordinated with mathematical precision. Dr. Calder's expression shifted from confident superiority to the desperate calculation of a cornered predator. "The game is concluded, Doctor," Holmes declared with quiet authority. "Your mechanical ingenuity transformed architectural features into theatrical impossibilities, while your medical knowledge provided the compounds necessary to render victims helpless. Lord Pemberton's financial desperation made him your unwitting accomplice, while the warehouse near Shadwell served as your educational facility for systematic coercion. The Progressive Alliance's vision of social transformation through intimidation ends tonight." As Lestrade's men secured their prisoner, Dr. Calder maintained his clinical composure even in defeat. "Race, you have delayed the inevitable. Mr. Holmes, nothing more. Others will continue the work we began, perhaps with methods less theatrical, but equally effective." His words carried the chilling conviction of a true believer whose faith remained unshaken by practical failure. The morning papers proclaimed the complete exposure of the vanished guest's mystery, yet Holmes showed little satisfaction in the public recognition. Back at Baker Street, he arranged the final evidence upon our Persian rug, the mica fragment, the silk thread detection device, the pharmaceutical samples, and Dr. Calder's detailed plans for expanding the conspiracy throughout Britain. "We have broken this particular network, Watson," he observed, reaching for his clay pipe. But the doctor's final words carry uncomfortable truth. Revolutionary movements possess a Hydra-like quality. The case files revealed a conspiracy of breathtaking scope, one that had threatened the very foundations of civilized society through systematic elimination of influential opposition. The impossible had been explained through logical deduction and scientific method, yet the victory carried sobering implications about the fragility of social order when confronted by educated extremism operating with revolutionary purpose. "The miracle of disappearance," Holmes concluded as he filed away the documents, "served as both lever and advertisement for their cause. Yet in their arrogance, they provided us with the very patterns that ensured their detection. The Committee for Civic Prudence has been defeated, but vigilance against such threats remains our permanent responsibility." He struck a match for his pipe, the small flame dancing in his keen eyes. "The game, my dear Watson, continues in forms we have yet to imagine.